Maybe the gain should be raised a little bit. How's that? Please let me know how it is. It's okay? Very good. Okay, I left the fan on, so if it's disturbing, I hope it doesn't disturb anyone. It's otherwise very warm in here, so I left it on. I left it on low. Okay, good. It's good to see. Well, not see, but know that you're back and new people who are joining in for the first time. So welcome. We have a new course. It's a short course in preparation for the high holidays. And when I was asked what I would like to focus on, I said, well, it's the season of prayer, so let's focus on some deeper understandings of the cycle of prayer. So we have our first class tonight, or today, or this morning, or whatever time it is for everybody, and good Chodesh to everybody. Chodesh Tov. Today was my first day. It was the opening day at our new school. Wow, was that a lot of teaching? But I'm here with you, and Hashem should help that I should have energy and time to be able to do everything. So let's see. So I want to take you more or less straight to the sources. Maybe I'll take a minute or two first. This first lesson, thank you. This first lesson, we're going to be focused on Selichot. Now, for those of us who are Sephardic, so the Sephardic practice is to begin tonight. I don't think they began last night. I think they begin tonight. But and for Ashkenazim, the practice is to begin the week before Rosh Hashanah. But the practice of Selichot, of saying Selichot, whether it's early in the morning or whether it's after midnight at night, there are a number of different customs and different practices in different communities. Instead of talking about the particulars of the Selichot, although we will look a little bit at the form of the Selichot prayer, so we have some idea of what it is. The Moroccans started this morning, or they start tomorrow morning? You started this morning, or you start tomorrow? That's what I thought. So you have, for those who are starting from the beginning of Elul, it's from once we enter into Elul, which is from today on, not from yesterday. So we have our Seder of Selichot, and those also they alter from community to community. So there's not a uniform, not really a uniform text of Selichot, but the question is, what kind of unites them? Now, there is the Selichot. Let's see. Do people have Selichot or Selichos? Do you have them in hand? Do you have a little booklet? We have, among Ashkenazim at least, we have a sort of different customs about what is said, what is recited each day, and it's a fairly involved service. It takes more time or less time depending on the customs in your community, and I want to go through a little bit of the at least part of the cycle, so we can understand the main elements. Now, part of we start off, let's say, with Ashrei, we have Kaddish, but when we get into the body of the Selichot prayers, we're going to begin I'm just going according to the majority of customs. If you have a different particular custom in your case, so please bear in mind that I'm going according to the Minhag of Ashkenazim, and forgive me because we do have some distinctions in our communities. So we have our organization of the Selichot themselves. Now, you have copies of Selichot, people have with you, you know what I'm talking about, because I want to be able to sort of run through it just quickly to have a basic idea of what we're talking about. After the initial opening, which is usually with, let's say, according to Minhag Ashkenazim, is Ashrei followed by Kaddish. Then we get into the text of the Vidui. Now, it's a sort of standard invocation of L'cha Hashem Hatzdaka Lanu Boshis Haponim. You, Hashem, to you, God, is righteousness. We are shamefaced before you. Manit onen, manomar, menadaber, manit stadak, nach besadrachenu v'nachkora. And I'm not going to necessarily go through all of the language of it because it's also very long. But we have here compilations of different verses that express contrition before Hakadosh Baruch Hu, a sense of stock taking, which is necessary during the season of Elul. And then we have afterwards, we tend to have a whole series of piyutim. Now, piyutim we're going to have in various traditions are liturgical poems. Very often they're acrostics, alphabetical acrostics. Now, when you see an alphabetic acrostic in prayer, which as we enter into this like high holiday season, you're going to see them many, many times, meaning we have some Tehillim that are alphabetic acrostics, and we have a famous chapter 119, which is an eightfold alphabetic acrostic. But what we have to sort of ask ourselves, what's the point of the piyutim that are arranged alphabetically? So just as one thing to bear in mind, when we find that a prayer is organized alphabetically, it's a signifier that the purpose of the prayer is to cover the bases me aleph ataf. Now, aleph ataf is the Hebrew idiom for doing something comprehensively, or like we say in English, from A to Z. So when something is arranged alphabetically, even though it's true, it is a literary convention. It became popular during certain times and certain stages in Jewish life to use the alphabetic acrostic as a poetic device. But nevertheless, when we come across it for us, just like as we find it in Tehillim, it's really to get into us that we want to cover our bases, me aleph ataf. We really want to cover the idea of this prayer is meant to be comprehensive, to cover, so to speak, from A to Z. Now, when we get to after a certain number of piyutim, fairly common to most nuschaot, we're going to have and it's not going to be once, it's going to be many times. We're going to have the Shloshesrei Middot Shel Rachamim, the 13 attributes of mercy. Now, next week, I plan to, I'm pretty sure that that's how I set it up in terms of the schedule for this 4 lessons. Let me just double check. What I said I was going to do. Because I'm teaching a lot of different classes, so I have to keep my head. Yeah, so I wanted to focus next week on the 13 attributes of mercy in greater detail. So for that, we're going to be looking into the Tom Devora and also a source in Likutey Moharan that I would like to discuss with you. It's a very important source. So here this week, I think that Chaya Rivka asked me, what should we say the subject matter is. I sort of tongue-in-cheek said, well, I think it should be lovely. Love is always having to say you're sorry. Now, love is always having to say you're sorry. I remember hearing, must have been a film or something that had a catch line in it. Love means never having to say you're sorry. And of course, I don't know anything about that film, but I do understand the sentiment, which means, when you love somebody, so you love them and you love them no matter what, and so it's not this kind of relationship where you have to constantly say I'm sorry, because you are accepted and loved and received. Yes, this is true. Nevertheless, I as tongue-in-cheek, I sort of said, well, love means always having to say you're sorry, because the truth is that in our love relationships, we do have to apologize. We do need to show contrition where we've made mistakes, and that's part of our process of slicha. That's part of our process of forgiveness. I don't know if I ever spoke about it here, but I have. If anyone's interested in this article, it's very interesting. So you can always write to me afterward, and I'll send it to you, Belin Eder. But I had read this article by it was put out in a journal for mediation studies. And the question was, well, why, what gets in the way of forgiveness, of people being able to forgive each other? I mean, if the point of mediation is to achieve a degree of reconciliation, right, and being able to move forward. And that's why you bring in a mediator. So it's obviously in the interest of someone who's in the business of mediation to really understand why things tend to break down in mediation. Why isn't the apology of A accepted by B? And why does that break down? And it's very much a part of Elul. I went to teach today, and one of the women we had a kind of closed seminar on the role and purpose of being an educator. It's really a seminar for women who are in education or who want to go into education, especially adult education. And one of the women said something that really struck me deeply. I almost started singing when she said it about the process of her own learning and study and development over time has been a kind of gradual reconciliation and renewal of her relationship with Hashem, because a lot of the message that she received about Yiddishkeit, about Judaism, growing up in a very religious environment, actually wasn't healthy for her emotionally. And so in order to be able to come to a healthier place in her relationship with Hashem, so she sort of had to reforge it. And I in my mind, I sort of heard echoing an old song in Yiddish. It goes, Lama zechi bebeten avinu shebashamayim. Lama zechi bebeten avinu shebashamayim. And it's very reminiscent for me of Elul as a whole, as the month, because really it's a month that is devoted to the process of reconciliation. So we go back to our let us reconcile, our Father in heaven, and it's a beautiful. I love the language of it. Lama zich ibabeten. Let us, and lama zich means like each one the other. Ibabeten, sort of like get over what is dividing us and reconcile, my Father in heaven. So so this is Elul, really. And I think back to this article on mediation about how the process of forgiveness can break down in mediation and why. And so one of the things that's discussed there, about 6 different elements that need to be in place, properly in place and genuine, in order for an apology to be accepted. And if anyone is interested in this article, you should feel free to write to me and I'll send it to you. But one of the elements, so it was very interesting because of the 6 elements that are necessary, I think it was 2 of them are total deal breakers. Like the other 4, I think it was 4 of them are sort of, if you have it, you have it. It adds to it. It helps. But there were 2 that were total deal breakers, and the one of the main ones was an expression of a genuine expression of contrition and regret. And that's in relationships, right? Here, we're not talking about halacha. We're not talking about the laws of teshuvah. We're talking about human relationships. It means if someone's done me wrong, so I'll have certain natural expectations or a kind of inner standard of what would really be the litmus test for me to feel safe and secure with this person, that whatever in whatever way they've wronged me, they genuinely regret it, they won't do it again. And so one of the deal breakers, it means if it's lacking, is this genuine expression of contrition and regret. And I have to say, a lot of what passes for apology nowadays in our world is nothing of the sort. Like all we have to do is look at, there've been a lot of very public apologies for very sometimes private misbehaviors and wrongs that were committed interpersonally. And so over the last little while, there's been an explosion of exposed people in various places of power and influence who have had to make these very public apologies, expressing their regret, contrition, whatever you want to call it. And we all know that, like, they don't always work or go over all that well. And the common trope, which is, it's getting more and more frequent that we come across it, is somebody will say, instead of saying, I'm sorry that I hurt you, they'll say, I'm sorry that you felt hurt by what I did. Now, in the realm of apologizing, so I'm sorry that I hurt you. I realize now that it was wrong. Right? So what we say, that is, if it's sincere, is an expression of contrition and regret. And I'm sorry that you felt offended, insulted, or demeaned by something that I said. That second statement, which is the most common form of public apology now, does anybody know why, actually? It's like I'm asking you as if you're supposed to answer me back, but you do have the option to chat in. So why has this become such a popular and common mode of apologizing? My own feeling about it is that it expresses less liability, right? Like it's a kind of also a legal, you probably have lawyers back there, lawyers in the background saying, well, apologize for the fact that, exactly, it's a way of, okay, so we call this decreasing liability. Now, in our relationship with Hashem, so the liability is there whether we own up to it or not. And the apologizing is not about, it's not a way of covering ourselves. Quite the contrary. The apologizing, or the process of slicha, of admitting, bapeh, with our mouths, that we've done things that we regret having done, and it's worthy of regret. So the process of actually being clear about it and not hedging and not covering ourselves. So you're sort of, you're kind of fighting against a cultural moment, to just do it the way it's supposed to be done, which is a little bit raw. And so slichot are a little bit raw. And so some people say, I can't say all of this, not only because they go to Beit Knesset, or even if they say it at home, it's like so much to say and it's so hard to keep up. So I have to tell you, you don't have a chiyuv, you don't have an obligation to actually say all of this. If you go to shul, you should focus on the elements and the sections that you're able to cover and say with the tzibur, together with the community, to the best of your ability, especially the Sippurey Middot shel Rachamim, especially those 13 attributes of mercy, which I'm going to talk about soon, but we're going to speak about them at greater length next week, because they are really the linchpin and the cornerstone, or whatever metaphor you want to use. Really, that's really the foundation of Selichot. Now, let's go back to the idea of always having to say you're sorry. So you say, oh my goodness, I've already said I'm sorry. Like, why do I have to say I'm sorry again? Why do I have to go back there? Why do I have to do teshuvah again and again? Do I have to do teshuvah over those that I have already confessed to them, felt regret over them, and I would like to move on from them? And those are all very good questions about the process of teshuvah and what's incorporated in, like, what comes under comes within the compass of the teshuvah that I need to do this year as opposed to last year, as opposed to 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So Rabbi Nachman addresses this idea in his very, very famous lesson on Sod Kavanot Elul. He has a sixth lesson of Likutey Moharan, addresses the issue of always having to say you're sorry, of the continuing process of teshuvah, and how we don't have to feel like revisiting something that feels like it's old or done with, that it is necessarily a wallowing in the past in an unhealthy way, because there are healthy and good and positive ways to revisit the past that are cleansing and that move us forward, that are not wallowing at all. So this act of continuous teshuvah, or continually refining the teshuvah, is really, Rabbi Nachman says, it's really like, this is the upward spiritual path for everybody who wants to keep on always growing and developing and changing. We shouldn't be afraid of it. And so when we revisit, so to speak, Elul, from year to year, we come back around our cycle, we come back to Elul, it's actually bringing us back to something very important for our spiritual growth, not just in the sense of clearing away the wreckage of the past, but also in kind of anchoring ourselves in a process of continual teshuva, which is about more than just cleaning up a mess. It's really about always ever growing. See, it's not just the tshuva of Elul, the uh, the cleansing process, which is really what it is. Chofetz Chaim would say, I'll say it in Yiddish because it rhymes in Yiddish, and then, I'll explain it in English, but maybe you'll get it even without because it's pretty similar to English. Menschen meinen as tshuva is a bear, ob es is nor a care. The Chofetz Chaim, the great sage and tzaddik, Rav Yisrael Meir Kagan, Kohen, who authored the book called Chofetz Chaim and also the Mishnah Berurah and a number of other sources that are very important. He was the great leading light of the previous generation. At this point, I guess it's 2 generations ago. It's hard to say. And so he would say, mention Meinin as tshuva is zabir. People are under the impression that tshuva is like a fearsome beast, like a monster, something to be afraid of. Obis is not a care, you say bear, care, they rhyme. But it's just a broom. Tshuva is a broom. The broom sweeps clean. You have to clean out the schmutz. If you want to be able to make good use of the space, you got to clean out the dirt. And so we come around once again, year to year, with the opportunity of taking stock and trying to figure out what needs to be cleared away. Where do we still have to focus our efforts and our energies in terms of where we need to grow and make some real changes. And okay, so Debbie just brought up an issue, which I'm going to talk about. We're going to get to it in the lesson about how teshuva can only be done based on the consciousness that we have of the ramifications of our actions at the time that we do that. And as time goes on, that can change drastically. I'll give you an example. You have, let's say, I'm a mother, right? So I can think, okay, the way I related to certain aspects of my personality, when I was in my 20s or even in my early 30s, that needed work, and how I needed to do teshuva over those Middot, over those character attributes in my own. So my understanding of the ramifications of those parts of myself that needed work in my 20s and in my early 30s that understanding is vastly different now than it was then. Now, even though I've changed, I still look back and I can think, oh, those words I used, those actions I did, that way I was. Even if things have changed significantly, I can look back now and my understanding of them and the effect that they've had on my children and on my other relationships in my life. So the movement forward of time and maturing, and also just watching life unfold, because you get to see the ramifications as they evolve. They give me a different awareness of the teshuva. Now, and people will do stuff like that all the time. They'll say, "Oh, if I'd only known then what I know now, I would have worked much harder to change that." And Rabbi Nachman, in certain ways, this is one way of understanding his use of the term tshuva al tshuva rishona. So let's look in the text. Let's look a little bit in the text, because the text is really, really, really always where we want to be. And we're going to skip ahead to subsection 3 here of Likutey Moharan lesson 6. Rabbi Nachman says, "V'tzarich le'achos tamid b'midat ha'teshuvah." It's necessary to hold on to the midah of tshuva. Now that's very interesting. He calls tshuva a midah. Tshuva is a way of being. When we talk about midot, we mean a character trait. And so we don't usually think of tshuva as a midah. It means being the kind of person who is self-reflective and makes self-assessment, does self-checking. That's called being a person who has a midah of tshuva, who has a character of tshuva, which is actually, I would say, is quite a different use of the term teshuva than we're used to in the classic sources. Kimi omar zikiti libi. If you look ahead, we're over here. Kimi omar zikiti libi. Who's really capable of saying, I have fully cleansed my heart out? Taharti mechatati. I've fully cleansed myself from my sin. I've purified myself from my sin, as it says in Mishlei. Who's really capable of saying that? Now, when Rabbi Nachman says this, he doesn't mean everybody should be walking around with a guilt complex all the time. He means that it being the case that as we grow and change, our understanding expands, and we must consider ourselves works in progress. So there's no final point at which you ever come and say, I'm done. I have completed, I have fixed and changed everything I need to. There is always more that needs to be accomplished. So since nobody can do that, it's obviously clear that you have to always hold on to the, like he says, hold on tight to the midah of teshuvah, that you have to hold on tight to this way of being of teshuvah. Ki b'shah she'adam omer chatati aviti pushati. The instant that a person says, chatati, aviti, pushati, it means to say he's in the middle of making his viduyim. We're in the middle of speaking our contrition expressing our contrite hearts before Hashem. Chatati, what does chatati mean? I sinned inadvertently, or we'll say, at least not purposefully. Aviti, I did it b'mezid, I meant to sin. Pushati, in my moment of sin, I even meant to rebel against you. That's heavy, right? Chotati abiti. Pushati, that's a full spectrum of sin. Afilu zeiv shalom abavar levav. We all know that in terms of our expression and our awareness and our genuine consciousness of what we have done, it's very hard for us to not be in some degree of a state of denial, or to express it fully, or to even understand it fully. I'm going to give you an example, just so that it comes clear. I heard this from a Rav, who's very wise, and of course, it's so devastating to hear. So you say, I went to go visit people that I didn't really know well, I went to go visit people I didn't really know well, and they were very upstanding, fine, righteous people. And I walked into their home, and their home was filled with beautiful artifacts and beautiful heirlooms and beautiful artwork. And I moved from room to room, and I marveled at everything that I saw. It was all very beautiful and all very precious. And they were very generous with allowing me to look at things and even to touch things. And anyway, I get to their main salon, and on the mantle, there's a goblet. It's a crystal goblet. So beautiful. And they were very generous with allowing me to be in contact with all of these artifacts and heirlooms that I thought, okay. I took it off the mantle, and while I was examining it and marveling over it, I dropped it. And it shattered into a million pieces. So the Balabasta came in, and she looked down and she saw the shattered goblet. And she said, oh, she just looked devastated. So I didn't know what to do with myself. And I said, I'm so sorry. It was so beautiful, and I didn't. I thought it was okay for me to touch it, and I didn't mean to drop it, and I'll replace it. And I don't care if I have to work every day for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm sure it's very expensive, but I'll replace it for you. So she says, well, it's very expensive. So I say, well, I'll do anything. I guess, like I said, I'll work every day of my life to earn back the money to pay it for you. I'll get you another one. And she said, well, it's actually one of a kind. Well, I'll get you a replacement, maybe perhaps made by the same artisan. Maybe we could find something that you would also enjoy. She said, well, but it's an heirloom. It's been in our family a very long time. Well, and now I'm really stuck because my goodness, how am I going to replace that? I mean, it has also it has sentimental value aside from its financial value. So now I understand it's totally irreplaceable. Well, what can I do? And she looks and she says, "That's the kos that Moshe Rabbeinu made Kiddush from? Well, obviously I can't replace that. Like, I have nothing to say now. And then she looks and she says, you know, the worst thing is we wanted to give it to you as a gift. So I remember when I heard this mashal. I remember when I heard the Rav say this story. I was very struck by it because obviously the point is that the act of contrition or the expression of the contrition is it starts to dawn on the person who has done the violation. We'll call it the violation. The shattering of the crystal goblet from which Moshe Rabbeinu made Kiddush. I mean, what does that mean? Like, it just means the mitzvah, right? Whatever is the mitzvah. So the breakage of that. So you say, well, I mean, obviously it's very precious, but it's that precious? Oh, it's that important? Oh, it really can't be replaced. I can't make it come back. Okay, so that is a little bit of what we're talking about, meaning it's this dawning and increasing awareness of, and the expression of contrition becomes more and more genuine when it becomes more and more clear that the act, or we'll call it the violation, is something that's so, it's not devastating to the balat habayit, to the master of the house. Who is it really devastating to, honestly? To me, because that coast was mine, because that goblet was a gift for me to take home and for me to have use from and for me to take into my family and my place. So when Rabbi Nachman says, who can say, like it's impossible for us to really make this expression, our chatati aviti pashati, which is not even so much an I'm sorry, but it is just like, this is what I did. That recognition of I acknowledge and I face the thing that I did. And to be able to say it, b'var levav, and var levav means with a pure heart, bli pniya, without any, now a pniya means an ulterior motive, or pniya can also mean without some kind of distracting thought. And really it means not only the purity of heart, but the purity of mind, that there's no pniya here, or that I'm not hedging, or think about all those apologies that aren't apologies, right? And so the process of the I'm sorry, and love is always having to say I'm sorry, because the truth is that in the love relationship with Hashem, in my ever increasing awareness of the preciousness of the gift that he has given me, which is the Torah itself with all of its commandments. So in my ever increasing appreciation and love for my Creator and for all of these means that he has provided me with coming closer to him. So clearly my sense of loss and having violated any of them, any of these precepts, is ever expanding and evolving based on my understanding of how very precious and irreplaceable each of them are. And so this changes and this evolves here. וזהו, מי יאמר זיכיתי ליבי, טיהרתי מחטאתי, היינו, מי יוכל לומר שליבו זך וטוב מפניות? So Rabbi Nachman has another way of reading it. He says, who's really capable of saying that my heart is clear from ulterior motives or hedging or self-protection or whatever we want to call it? Afilu b'shah shomer chatati, even at the very moment that we're expressing these words of contrition, it's very, very hard to do it cleanly. וזהו מי יאמר וכולי טיהרתי מחטאתי, היינו, שיהיה טהור מן החטאתי אביתי פשעתי שאמר. And here Rabbi Nachman does something which is like a kind of I would say it's a little bit of a modern trick of kind of a modern way of expressing the idea of kind of folding the phrase in upon itself, so we understand that you can read it as even b'sha'at ma'aseh, even while I'm in the act of saying these words, right? Who can say that I am free of pniot, free of ulterior motives or distraction. Shamar, ki gam az eno zachador bli pniot. Nimtza. So it turns out, or it comes out, or kumt zochais, as we say. Shetzarich lasot teshuvah rishona. Here he uses this phrase. It's very famous. So it turns out that a person must always continuously do teshuvah over the earlier teshuvah. Now, if it's a continual story of always doing teshuva over the early teshuva, so how do we not get stuck in the past and like how are we supposed to move on if I'm always going back and back and back? The truth is that it's not exactly going back because as one grows and one changes, so it's this growth and change exactly the good stuff. That's the positive forward motion, right? So all of this positive forward motion um, is actually part of the process of rehabilitating the places that were incomplete in tshuva earlier, and it's not Rabbi Nachman who innovates this idea. I mean, our famous Shari Teshuvah, Rabbeinu Yonah, also deals with this idea of why do we go back and ask for forgiveness for the same thing year after year? Meaning, shouldn't we have faith in the power of tshuva that once it's done, it's done? And the answer is, it's only done if it's actually done. But if the underlying parts of my personality, of my nature, which led me to do the sin in the first place, are still with me, and if the further ramifications are still with me, then it's something that I still obviously need to work on. And I have to approach it not from the same place I did 20 years ago. I have some other way that I have to approach it. But the teshuvah rishonah is still there. At this point, I think we're going to leave it, but he's really saying at a later stage, what you're really doing is doing teshuvah not for having, I don't know, eaten the cheeseburger before you knew that cheeseburgers were not kosher, right? That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about going back and re-examining the process of teshuvah and saying like, I stopped, I regretted it at that stage of my life for this reason, but since then, I have come to so many other reasons, and I have come to appreciate so many other reasons for doing this process of teshuva. And I look back and I say, that's why I regretted doing X, Y, or Z 20 years ago. No, now I understand it in a different light. And so it is an ever evolving. It's not going back to the past because on that level that teshuva worked. It's not as though it didn't do its job. It did, but we've changed and we've grown, and so our teshuva changes and grows along with us. Now, Rabbi Nachman moves on, and he uses a term. I'm just going to skip down a little bit, right? So he says, even if a person knows that he really did a good job of teshuva earlier, it's the first time he introduces the idea of what we call teshuva al hasagato harishona, meaning a deeper level of teshuva is not really on the actions, but on my relationship with Hashem and how he uses the term of that I have been, and human beings are always prone to this, is that we are constantly thinking of God in our own terms. Now, it's not that we have some other terms to think of him in, but God is utterly different than us. And so it's very hard for us not to fall into the error of thinking about God as being like, I'm smart. I wrote a book for a Rav who put it like this. I thought it was so smart. He says, I'm smart and God is like smarter than me, right? Or I'm generous, so God is like more generous than me, meaning God is just me, supersized. Exactly. So Debbie says, by default, our seichel makes God small. Precisely. Our human understanding tends to diminish our awareness of Hashem. And as we grow and develop and change, so hopefully our hasagot, or our grasp, or apprehension of the divine is also evolving and changing. So we look back and say, that's what I thought? Really? And it can be also in the relationship, like it actually came up in class today quite a bit. This idea of I was given like a mental framework, or some kind of like I guess a mental framework to think about Hashem. I was provided with that by my family, by my schools, by my culture, however it was formed in my mind. And it's immature, because when we talk to little children about Hashem, we have like we have little choice but to speak in terms that they understand. And so it's like seeing a person, like seeing ourselves in the mirror. How ridiculous would it be? Would it be if I caught myself in the mirror having put on, I don't know, like the dress that I wore when I was in third grade, when I was this little thing. Like if I tried to put that on and then go prancing around in it, so I'd say, wow, something's wrong here. Yeah. And if I'd look at myself in the mirror, I'd say, my goodness, it's not only ridiculous, like there's something really kind of horrible about that. Why are you doing that? And the answer is we're walking around all the time with mental conceptions of a Kadosh Baruch Hu that were laid down when we were still very mature. And as we grow and change and develop, we have an obligation to make those garments, to expand those garments to suit us and to fit us in the different stage that we are. And so Rabbi Nachman also speaks about this idea of teshuva al teshuva rishona, teshuva al hasaga rishona, that our awareness of Hashem, our understanding of God, to whatever extent that we are able to apprehend God, is something that's constantly in flux. And that's also something that is the perpetual sorry of teshuva, which is nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't mean that you're wallowing in guilt. So we go back, right? We say, L'cha Hashem tzedakah v'lanu boshes hapan. To you Hashem is righteousness, and we are left here with feeling shamefaced, right? Now, the way you say that at one stage of your life is not the way you say it at another stage of your life, nor should it be. And so we go back again as we make the rounds again to slichas. It's not so much about saying slicha for what we've done, which it also is. It also is, because there's a shamnu bagat. Like we do have the stuff that we have to get off our chest, and then we have to speak out. We have to become more aware of. We have to express contrition over it, and also face it, not deny it, not hedge around it or pretend like it didn't happen, but actually just to confront it and be confronted by it, which is really what slichas is all about. Now, let's go on. So we have spoken about the idea of the perpetual process of teshuva. And I'm going to leave it go for now. We're going to move on to a different lesson to think about things differently, since when we go to the actual text of the Selichot, so the main business of Selichot is going to be this continual return over and over again to Shloshes Middot Shel Rachamim, going back to reciting the 13 attributes of mercy. Now, the 13 attributes of mercy make two appearances, more or less. They make one appearance in Parshat Kitisa, which is in the aftermath of the sin of the golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moshe was given a gift, it was really a gift, after achieving reconciliation between Hashem and the Jewish people after such a very devastating breach. So he drew down into the world this thing called the 13 attributes of mercy. It has its expression in Parshat Kitisa, and it has a parallel expression in the Navi Micha, which, if you are familiar with your Machzer, so when you get to Tashlich, you're going to see it there, that we say Mikel Kamocha, and Mikel Kamocha parallels attribute for attribute the 13 Middot as they appear in the Torah itself. And next week, when we go and take a little, we're going to take a little walk through, Bezrat Hashem, we'll take a little walk through the 13 attributes of the, what's called the 13 Middot of the Keter, of the Ramak of Rav Moshe Cordovero, who authored the Talmud Devorah. So we're going to look at that next week, Bezrat Hashem, but just for now, to be aware that there, the Talmud Devorah, the Ramak, is going to be using the framework, he's going to be relying on the framework as we find it, the 13 attributes as expressed through the language of the prophet Micha, which is the same as the text in Tashlich. But I'm just letting you know that it's one for one, and if you want to know which is which, open up your Machzer, and you're going to see that above or below, depending on how it's set up, it's usually above, each of the words of the nusach, the language of Tashlich as brought from Micha, so there are going to be the parallel phrases of the 13 attributes as they appear in the Chumash, and those are reference, meaning that even as you say Mikel Kamocha, you're supposed to have the first midah in front of your eyes. You're going to see it also, and be thinking about what it means. Now, what is all of this business with the Sippurey Midot Shel Rachamim? That's really the question. I mean, what are they, and how did they come into the world, and why are they so important, and why do we keep coming back to them? And you know that by the time we get to Yom Kippurim, we're going to go back to them again and again and again, because Yom Kippurim all through, and by the time we get to Ne'ilah, so it's, by the time we get to Ne'ilah, it's just, Shloshes Midot Shel Rachamim again, 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 again. Now, the Talmud tells us that Zchut Avot Tamu, that there comes a point in history when the merits of the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that they kind of run out. Now, that doesn't mean that they really run out, because we know, Biglal Avot, Toshia Bane, that the redemption is also in the merit of the Avot, especially in the merit of Yitzchak. So don't think that it really ran out. That's not what it means. But we have this idea of Zchut Avot. Yeah, I'm going to say that they don't come back, they come. Thank you for the reminder, but I'm going to get there in a minute. So we have this idea of Zchut Avot. There's a certain point, as a debate, actually, the sages debate about at what point we define the ending of Zchut Avot, the merit of the forefathers. Now, again, it doesn't mean that the merit is not still there, but the merit is not a blanket merit. It means that to the extent that a person, this is one way of looking at it, to the extent that a person is bonded with the Avot, to that extent do they have the protection of the merit of the Avot. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why we start off Shmona Esrei with Avot. We start off with Magen Avraham, which is, like the Sfas Emes says, that's that little point of connection, of bonding with the merit of the Avot, that it should be protected. I'm asking Hashem that it should stay, that spark should stay lit, that pintaliyid, that little, that point should stay alive within me. It needs protection. Not so simple. Zchut Avot, there's a question. Tamu. So, but then Shloshes Midot, 13 attributes of mercy, lo tamu. They don't expire. There is no expiration date on these Shloshes Midot. It means that their power and the idea of invoking them, that we go back to them and we'll say them again and again, and we actually say them constantly. It's not just Selichot. I mean, we say these every day. So you have our Shloshes Midot Shel Rachamim are with us constantly. Now, the idea of the 13 Midot, we're going to go through them tomorrow. Not tomorrow, next week. We'll be going through them individually, but just as a whole, this idea of 13 Midot is rooted in very lofty places. It says that the world of the Keter, that the realm of Keter, or what's also called Arich Anpin. Arich Anpin means the long face, which really means actually because of the long nose. Your face, the crux of your face is your nose. So the crux of the Midot is Erech Apayim, that God is long-suffering. Now, Erech Apayim doesn't really literally mean long-suffering. Erech Apayim, having the quality of forbearance, is associated with the nose because of this idea of taking the long breath to arouse the patience, to arouse, to bring mitinut, forbearance, patience, and kind of like a, what's the word? Just to not be in haste to act. That's called having erech apayim, being slow to anger. Right now, it means, but literally, it means long face or long nostrils. Now, the idea of arich anpin in the deeper works, the place, if we could call it in terms of a place, obviously it's not a physical place. It means the conceptual place of these 13 midot is said to reside in the uppermost worlds, a very lofty place called Arich Anpin. Arich Anpin, long nose, long face, is is part of the qualities of the Keter. Now, when I talk about these Kabbalistic concepts, so I don't want to lose you, and I don't want it to go further afield than it needs to go. So I'm just going to say it like this. Rabbi Nachman in the lesson that I brought here, 105, in the first section of Likutey Moharan, Rabbi Nachman, he brings a very interesting and simple mashal to explain the process by which we arouse divine mercy. It's like this. In the aspects of the Middot that are closer to our realm of action, we don't call those Middot, the main area of the Middot, Arich Anpin. They have a different name, a different nickname, not long face, but little face, Zer Anpin, little face, miniature face. And for those who are familiar with saying certain Zmirot on Shabbos, right, Zer Anpin comes up in the Zmirot of the Arizal, and you might be familiar with it from other classes or other sources. But we have this idea of like your emotive qualities. They're katan. They're small, also in terms of their expression within us. Limited. There's a limitation there. Like a human being can only be so merciful, can only be so generous, can only be so emistic, so truthful, can only be so. Why? Because we're limited. And so the manifestation of the Middot in the small frame, which we would call its parallel is called Zer Anpin, is within a degree of limitation. Now, when we go higher, so we say, but there has to be some root to all of these qualities that's closer to their source in infinity, which is where they emerge from. They can't have that limitation at their root, where they originate from, just in their manifestation. That's lower down. Yeah, there's some limitation, but what about at their root? So about this, the Zohar HaKadosh says, Is rachamim ve'is rachamim. There's mercy, and then there's mercy. There's mercy as manifest down here in the place of limitation and constraint, which is also manifest in the ways in which we're merciful with each other or are able to activate mercy. It's not easy to activate mercy in this world. Nevertheless, at the root, higher up, the qualities of mercy are not strained, as the poet said. That means to say there's no constriction there. There's no limit there. So like the Zohar Kodesh says, Is rachamim ve'is rachamim. There's mercy, and then there's mercy, right? There's the mercy that's the mercy that we know. Rachamim pshutim, simple mercy. And then we have rachamim gedolim. We have big mercy in the sense of unlimited mercy. As it says in the Navi, uverachamim gdolim akabtzech. I will gather you in from the exile with great mercy, with abundant mercy. The abundance of mercy, or the unrestricted mercy, is expressed in the 13 attributes of mercy. That's the full spectrum of unrestrained, unconstrained mercy. Now, what happens when we recite those attributes? That's really the question. Why is it such an important part of our prayers? What does it do? Like just by saying it, it does something? And the answer is yes. Yes. Just like when a Jew stands for Shmona Esrei and says, Magen Avraham. And that means that I'm asking that Hashem is, I'm not only acknowledging that God is the shield of Avraham, but I'm also asking for Hashem to protect my aspect of Avraham that's inside of me, my Jewish spark that's inside of me. So when I do that, I demonstrate that I am connected to the quality of Avraham, and I know of Avraham, and I know that it needs to be protected and cultivated inside of myself. That's already something. Now, when we stand and we recite again and again these Shloshes Midot, these 13 attributes of mercy. So it's true, in our own small place, in our place of constriction, we're not always great at manifesting the higher, unrestrained qualities of mercy. We're not always good at that. Nevertheless, we know that such rachamim exists, and what we are doing is trying to activate through arousing within ourselves the emotive, we'll call it like the emotive reaching up and out through prayer, trying to like press buttons. And it's not formulaic, it's really a very deep idea, is that these are trigger points that are available to us via the agency of Moshe Rabbeinu having all that time ago been willing to sacrifice himself fully, literally sacrifice his life in order to save the Jewish people. It means he was acting in the capacity of a Rachaman Amiti, a genuinely the higher quality of mercy. And so he drew down into the world through the power of his overcoming the small mercy and going to the high mercy. He brought into the world a kind of, I don't want to say a formula, but it's like a template. And the template is mechayev us. It's true. That means to say, the template obligates us to develop the qualities of mercy to a higher extent, which is really part of the work of Elul, is to work on these Middot of Sippurey Maasiot, which we're going to talk about next week, understanding what they are, bichlal, meaning they all have very different meanings, and they are all really, really challenging. In all of the places in our lives where it's hard for us to access mercy, that's where we're told again and again, if you want to receive mercy, you're going to have to access and deepen and broaden your quality of mercy because it's parallel. You're at Tzelem Elokim, you're created in the image of God, and the changes that you make in the revelations of the higher aspect of mercy that are within you, you do have the capacity. Because it's connected to you, you're able also to press those buttons. It's not formulaic and it's not automatic, but we do have this idea of the kind of parity, and so we reach up. Now, Rabbi Nachman, and just to finish off here, because it's almost, we're almost out of time. But I mean, officially we are out of time, but we started maybe two minutes or something like that. So we're going to skip down to a mashal that Rabbi Nachman uses. Ooh. Oh, it's not turning. What are we going to do? Turn our head sideways? I guess I'm going to tell it to you about Peh. Okay, I'll tell it to you from outside because I can't turn the page. I thought it was going to reverse, and it's not reversing. So I'll tell you the story. Once upon a time, there was a man who fell into very great distress and trouble, and he needed an enormous amount of money to come out of this trouble. Rabbi Nachman doesn't specify, but let's say, I don't know, the kinds of things that people go to raise money for, like some kind of, God forbid, his child has a terrible disease, and the only place where they can provide therapy and healing for this child is in some faraway country where the treatment is going to be extremely expensive, and so on. He needs hon atzum. He needs an enormous amount of money, and he doesn't. And he's a poor man. He's just a plain guy. He doesn't have connections like that. What's he supposed to do? Well, in his town, it happens to be that he knows someone who's wealthy. But the wealthy man that he knows really doesn't have the money to give him to be able to take care of his problem. So he goes anyway and he appeals. And he says, I need your help. And this is my problem, and this is what I need. And you know what? I even know that you don't necessarily have the ability to help me, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And the Gvir, the person with the money, he says, I really want to help you. I really want to help you, but I can't. But I know somebody who's an incredibly wealthy person. He's a multi-billionaire. I mean, he makes me look like a pauper. And if I appeal to him in the right way, he could be extremely generous. He certainly has the resources. So that's what I'm going to do for you. I can't help you except by way of accessing. I can maybe provide access, and I'll ask him on your behalf. So Rabbi Nachman uses this as a mashal. He uses this as a parable to explain a kind of upward chaining of influence and appeal that happens when we use the language of the 13 Midot Shel Rachamim. How with this minor, small appeal for mercy, we access something like we'll call it the button. And it's not the button that brings the mercy, but it's sort of like sending a message upstairs to the next level up, to be able to access a generous outflow of mercy that's completely unconstrained. And so that we run back again and again, always to these Shloshes Midot, and this is our tradition, and this is our way, and this is our way going back to the beginning. And as Debbie says, right, why do we say about the 13 Midot that Shehem Enan Chozrot Rekan, that they don't come back empty-handed? That means to say, a proper touching of those points through the recitation of the Shloshes Midot always, in some way or another, unlocks a channel of mercy. That's what it means, that they don't come back empty-handed. It always opens up some channel of mercy. Do you always get to see the result that you would like to see? Look, this is tefillah. With tefillah, you don't necessarily get to see the result you want to see. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is not now. But that it triggers a flow of mercy in the world, this it does. And so the Shloshes Midot is something that we're very, very invested in throughout Selichot, and we're going to see also throughout the Tefillot of Yom Kippurim. Okay, that's it for today. I wish everybody well. I'm sorry I was a little tired. It's been a very